So, incoming US President Donald Trump wants to invade Greenland. Are we actually doing this? Join me in this video as we explore the geopolitical chess of Donald Trump, Denmark, and Greenland, and explore some scenarios in this bizarre turn of events. Can't believe I'm doing this.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going? So, as you could probably tell, I'm a little bit starstruck by these developments, but we'll be delving into a story that sounds like it's ripped straight from a political thriller. The US President-elect Donald Trump has once again set his sights on Greenland. If you think it's just political theatre, well, not so much. Trump's interest in Greenland isn't new. He floated the idea of buying it 5 years ago in 2019, but now he's refused to rule out using economic or even military force to take control of the island. This has sent shockwaves throughout not just Greenland, but Denmark and the whole of NATO itself. Now, please use the tools around if you'd like to share this video and the bizarre elements of it as we continue to discuss this. But I think it's worth also expanding on some historical context, which is that for a time, Greenland was under US occupation during the Second World War between April and July of 1941, respectively, to keep them out of German hands, as well as to gain greater control over the transatlantic theatre and shipping routes being targeted by Nazi U-boats. Notably, Hitler regarded Iceland as being within the, quote, German fighting zone, and saw the occupation as evidence of US preparations to enter World War II eventually. Germany and Italy would declare on the US war itself, and then obviously Pearl Harbor happened. So taking Greenland was incredibly important at the time for the United States. And it seems to be that Donald Trump wants to repeat that, even though a world war is seemingly, at least last time I checked, not happening. Still, there are a few different scenarios about how this could happen. So let's take a look at some potential ones, increasingly in terms of escalation, at least. So why Greenland matters. Greenland is the largest island in the world, strategically located in the Arctic. It's mostly covered in ice, but beneath that ice lies a huge array of untapped mineral wealth, rare earth metals, oil, gas, etc. For the US, Greenland is more than just a resource hotspot. It is a key part of that Arctic security. The island already hosts what's known as the Pyotr space, a critical radar station for detecting ballistic missiles, including potential nuclear threats from Russia. And here's where things get even more interesting. Both China and Russia have been expanding their influence in the Arctic. For the US, control of Greenland, at least from Trump's perspective, he argues would secure a dominant position in that region and keep these rivals at bay. So the first scenario really is Trump loses interest. Trump's interest in Greenland fizzles out as he looks at more important things. He gets distracted by more important things. Some people who know Trump believe that his rhetoric is more a negotiating tactic aimed at pressuring Denmark to invest more specifically and targetedly in Greenland security. Denmark has already announced about $1.5 billion of defense for the Arctic, including dog sled patrols, upgraded airports and fighter jets and such. But even if Trump just moves on, the spotlight he's put on Greenland would certainly not dissipate completely. The island's aspirations for independence have been given a new breath of energy, a new breath of wind behind them, with Greenlandic leaders using the moment to really push for not just more autonomy, but eventual opportunity to seek independence. The second scenario is that Greenland votes for independence. Indeed, Greenland has been under Danish control for 300 plus years, but its people have long aspired for their independence. The population is not large, it's about 57,000. So whether or not it could sustain itself from such a level of population remains to be seen. But with the rate of climate change, ice caps melting, more people could potentially relocate to Greenland as well. To go it alone, indeed, Greenland would need financial guarantees, possibly from the US. It does rely heavily on subsidies from Denmark to fund things like healthcare, education, and welfare. Some experts suggest a, quote, free association arrangement could occur, similar to what the US has had with the Marshall Islands, which could be a middle ground. But here's the twist. Even if Greenland gains independence, it likely won't escape that US influence. The 1951 agreement that occurred between the Danish and the Americans already gives the US significant leverage over Greenland's defense. In essence, you already the US really hasn't actually ever left in the past 70, 80 years. The third scenario is more coercive. Trump steps up economic pressure. Now, Trump is not exactly quiet in how he wants to go about leveraging tariffs and other economic policy parts of the policy toolkit to get what he wants. But he could upscale more specifically economic coercive measures against Denmark and Greenland specifically to get them to play ball. Imagine the US drastically increasing tariffs specifically on Danish goods more than the flat 20% he's threatened across the world completely, or in broader European products, which he would hope capitulates the Danish into concessions over Greenland. Danish industries like pharmaceuticals, which do supply vital medicines like insulin to the US, could be hit hard particularly as well. However, this approach is very risky. Higher prices on these goods won't sit well with American consumers, and it would damage relations within NATO, which are already fractious given Trump's incoming presidency and comments around Ukraine and generally European defense, though one can argue he has a fair point. Still, economic pressure remains one of Trump's most likely tools and ones that he could already sort of leverage that complements his preferred approach as it stands. And then, of course, scenario 4, Trump invades Greenland. On paper, it sounds kind of absurd. Denmark's defense budget is not even 10 billion, while the US spends nearly $1 trillion per year. The Danish military has 17,000 personnel, and much of its heavy equipment has already been sent to Ukraine. But here's the kicker. The US already has a significant presence in Greenland. Anyway, there are American bases and radar stations all over the island, and Greenland's defense relies heavily on the 1951 agreement with Washington, i.e., if the US wanted to annex Greenland, there's not much the Danish could do at all. The Europeans have said that they will get involved, the French and Germans particularly saying they will not allow the Americans to do it. But again, by the time the Europeans got militarily present in the area, the Americans would likely already control it. And would you really expect the Europeans, who lack their own army, to do that? So would this be a case of bilateral countries doing it, or an actual scenario where NATO forces on one side are going up against the head of the NATO organization, i.e. the Americans, which would be the most bizarre scenario of, I think, modern history. But such an action would obviously be an international crisis. And technically you could see NATO's Article 5 being invoked, but this would pit the US against its own allies, which, well, the Kremlin and Beijing would absolutely love, but it would be the most, as I said, bizarre scenario one can imagine. So what does this all mean? Trump's remarks are drawing comparisons to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, who justify territorial ambitions with a sense of entitlement, you can argue. If we take Trump's threats seriously, it's a bad omen for Western unity, but the NATO alliance more broadly. The US acting unilaterally in Greenland would really undermine NATO's ability to leverage a sense of, resolution and alignment, particularly in the context of Ukraine. From the Trump perspective, they argue that Greenland is 100% dependent on the US already. Greenland already wants independence, so the US is simply helping them to do that. Greenland is dependent on financial support, and it's of such extreme geopolitical importance for the US vis-a-vis the Chinese and the Russians that to Trump, at least, it makes sense to simply just assume the Greenland population would be happy with that. I'm not entirely sure of the way to call people from Greenland. Greenlandiers? I think that's right. But yeah, at the same time, Denmark and Greenland do face tough choices. They must balance their relationship with the US while navigating the island's growing independence movement. And I think that it's worth keeping in mind there is a medium approach here. One of the scenarios, I think, allowing the US and Denmark to have some kind of shared influence over the island, whilst also enabling the Greenland population the ability to choose for themselves whether or not they want to seek independence. I don't believe the US really has any rationale to annex Greenland in the modern day and age. What we consider to be the age of expansionism, we would like to hope is over, and such a move would undermine existing border norms and international sort of standards, principles, values. I never thought a modern day US of all countries would attempt to annex, or at least threatening to annex, an allied partner's territory. And it certainly would be setting a bad precedent, which is emboldened by revisionists in Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and such. So, in my opinion, I think you could see some kind of middle approach. I find an invasion absolutely bizarre, but certainly some kind of discussion about whether or not there could be shared influence over the island, and whether or not that leads to a greater independence for the people of Greenland, which, to be fair, you can understand. A free association arrangement perhaps is the most likely scenario here, which avoids conflict but settles as many people's aspirations as possible. But what's next for Greenland? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think about this? And if you want a video on Panama and Canada and Trump's desire for greater America, then let me know. But thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you'd like to stay on the Global Gambit, you've either got to get playing, we play. Take care.